In 1600, Japan had a problem the shogunate could not solve. 400,000 men trained from childhood to kill, walking the country with 2 swords on their hips and no master to serve. They were called Ronin. The word means wave man, a warrior adrift. The law said they had to kill themselves when their lord died. Most of them refused, so Japan tried to ban them, ignore them, and quietly hope they would disappear. Instead, in the year 1651, a small group of these masterless warriors came within days of burning the capital city of Edo to the ground. This is the story Japan spent 2 centuries trying to forget. To understand the Ronin, you have to understand what a samurai actually was before he fell. In feudal Japan, a samurai was not a wandering hero with a sword. He was a sworn retainer. He served a daimyo, a feudal lord, and that service was the entire structure of his life. In return for absolute loyalty, the daimyo gave him a stipend, usually paid in rice, along with social status that placed him above farmers, craftsmen, and merchants in the rigid 4-tier class system. He was permitted to carry the daisho, the paired katana and wakizashi, that marked him as a member of the warrior class. He was bound by bushido, the way of the warrior, a strict code that demanded loyalty, discipline, and a willingness to die for his lord, without hesitation. The samurai did not work for himself. He existed inside a relationship. And when that relationship ended, so did his entire identity. A samurai could lose his master in 3 ways. The first was death. If his daimyo died in battle or fell to illness, the warrior who had served him was suddenly stranded. The second was confiscation. If the Tokugawa shogunate decided a daimyo had broken the rules or simply needed to be reduced in power, the central government would seize the lord's domain. Every samurai serving that lord would be cut loose at once, sometimes hundreds of men in a single day. The third was dismissal. When a samurai fell out of favor and was cast out, his name struck from the clan registers. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. He was now a Ronin, and under the strictest reading of the Bushido code, he was supposed to do one thing immediately: open his belly with a wakizashi blade in the ritual called seppuku, also known in the West as harakiri. To die with his master was the honorable path. To live on as a masterless warrior was to live in shame. Most Ronin refused the knife. This was the foundation of everything that came next. A class of trained killers who chose to keep breathing in defiance of the code that defined them, a society that called them cowards for staying alive, and a government that had no idea what to do with so many of them. The flood began in October of 1600 at the Battle of Sekigahara. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the warlord who would soon found the Tokugawa shogunate, won a decisive victory on a foggy battlefield in central Japan. The losing side, a coalition of daimyo loyal to the Toyotomi clan, was crushed. In the months that followed, Ieyasu's government systematically confiscated the lands of the defeated lords. Some daimyo were reduced, many were destroyed entirely. Their samurai had nowhere to go. Historians estimate that as many as 400,000 Ronin existed in Japan at this moment. 400,000 men with weapons, training, and no income. They drifted toward the major cities, Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, looking for work, looking for a new master, looking for any way to survive. For a few years, the situation was manageable. Some Ronin found new employers among the surviving daimyo. Others took up farming or moved into the entertainment districts to work as theater performers and musicians. But then the Tokugawa shogunate started closing the doors. Under Tokugawa Ieyasu, the third shogun who ruled from 1623 to 1651, the rules tightened. Samurai were forbidden from taking employment under a new master without their previous master's permission. Since the previous master was usually dead or disgraced, that permission was almost impossible to obtain. The class system hardened. Former samurai could no longer legally take up trades or move between professions. Ieyasu was also aggressive about confiscating the lands of daimyo who displeased him. During his reign, his policies threw thousands of new Ronin into the streets every year. The problem was not shrinking, it was getting worse. The shogunate had built a legal cage. The men inside the cage were armed and getting hungrier. Walk through the back alleys of Edo in the year 1670, and you would have seen them everywhere. Men in worn kimonos with 2 swords on their hips, the daisho still legally permitted to them as a mark of their lost samurai heritage. They lived in the cheapest tenement houses, the kind rented out to commoners and laborers. Their stipends were gone. They survived however they could. The most common trade for a Ronin in this period was making umbrellas. The work was simple, required almost no capital, and could be done from a small rented room. Paper fans were another option. Some taught reading and writing to merchant children. Those with medical knowledge became unlicensed doctors in the poorer districts. The ones who refused to abandon the sword found other ways. Wealthy merchants in Osaka hired them as bodyguards, called yojimbo, to protect trade caravans on the dangerous roads between cities. Gambling houses and brothels in the entertainment quarters paid them as enforcers. Many slid further into the criminal underworld, the early ancestors of what would become the Yakuza, working as muscle for protection rackets and as bandits on the highways outside the cities. This is the part of the story that does not appear in the romantic tales. The wives of poor Ronin, women born into samurai families and raised to expect honor and security, were sometimes forced into prostitution to feed their children. They worked the night markets in the cheap districts of Edo. The slang term for them was yotaka, meaning night hawks. Their husbands kept their swords and their surnames. Their families kept their dignity in name only. But not all Ronin faded into poverty. A small handful built reputations that have survived 400 years. The most famous was Miyamoto Musashi, born in 1584, who fought on the losing side at Sekigahara and emerged as a masterless warrior. Musashi spent the next decades traveling Japan as a duelist. He fought, by his own count, more than 60 duels. He never lost. His most famous duel on the small island of Ganryujima in 1612 ended with Musashi killing his rival Sasaki Kojiro with a wooden sword carved from a boat oar. Near the end of his life, Musashi retreated to a cave in Kumamoto and wrote the Book of Five Rings, a treatise on swordsmanship still read by martial artists and business executives around the world today. Other Ronin escaped poverty through art and scholarship. Matsuo Basho, the wandering poet who created the foundations of modern haiku, came from a fallen samurai family. Chikamatsu Manzeman, often called the Shakespeare of Japan, abandoned samurai life to write plays for the kabuki stage. Arai Hakuseki studied so intensely during his time as a poor Ronin that he was eventually hired by the shogunate itself. These men were the exceptions. The vast majority of Ronin lived and died without leaving a name behind. And some of them in the year 1651 decided they had nothing left to lose. His name was Yui Shosetsu. He was 46 years old, the son of a commoner family from Suruga province, raised by a circle of older Ronin who taught him swordsmanship and military strategy. As an adult, he opened a school of military strategy in the Kanda neighborhood of Edo, in a district called Renjaku-cho. He also ran an armorer's shop and an ironworks. His school attracted students from across the samurai class, from low-ranking Ronin to senior retainers of the shogunate itself. The school was officially a place for teaching swordsmanship. Unofficially, it was a place where masterless warriors gathered to talk about their grievances against the Tokugawa government. Yui became close with a fellow instructor named Marubashi Chuya, a Ronin from Yamagata who taught spear fighting and military tactics. Marubashi had a personal grudge. His father had been killed fighting against the Tokugawa armies at the siege of Osaka in 1615. He had been waiting his entire adult life for revenge. Beginning around 1645, the two men started planning a coup. Their plan was extraordinary in its ambition. Marubashi would lead a group of conspirators in Edo. Using barrels of gunpowder, they would set the wooden city on fire. The Tokugawa capital was famous for its flammability. A great fire would spread quickly through the dense neighborhoods, and the shogunate's forces would have to scatter to fight the flames. In the chaos, Marubashi's men would storm Edo Castle, kill the senior officials of the shogunate, and seize the seat of national power. At the same time, Yui Shosetsu would lead a second force to the Tokugawa stronghold at Sunpu, modern-day Shizuoka. Coordinated attacks were planned for Osaka Castle and the imperial city of Kyoto. The conspirators waited for the perfect moment. That moment came in the spring of 1651, when Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu died and his 10-year-old son Tokugawa Ieyatsuna inherited the title. The country would be temporarily destabilized. The new shogun was a child. Senior counselors would be distracted with the succession. Wayui's plot was set to launch in the summer. It almost worked. The plan collapsed because of a fever. In the weeks before the attack, Marubashi Chuya fell sick with a high temperature. In his delirium, he began muttering about the conspiracy, naming co-conspirators, describing the gunpowder, talking through the attack plans. People in his household overheard him. Some of them carried the information to the authorities. The information reached Matsudaira Nobutsuna, the senior counselor of the shogunate, a man so respected for his political instincts that he was nicknamed Chie Izu, meaning clever Izu. Matsudaira moved within hours. Marubashi was arrested at his home in Edo. 33 of his fellow plotters were rounded up alongside him, including some of their male family members. The interrogations were brutal. The executions were swift. On September 24th, 1651, Marubashi and his conspirators were put to death. Several of them were crucified, the standard punishment for crimes against the state. Yui Shosetsu was in Sunpu when the news reached him. Surrounded by shogunate officials at his lodging, with no escape and no army left to lead, Yui composed a final note and committed seppuku. Several of his closest followers killed themselves alongside him. In his suicide note, Yui claimed something remarkable. He wrote that the goal of the rebellion had never actually been to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate. His real intention, he said, had been to call public attention to the desperate situation of the Ronin, to force the government to see them. Whether that note was sincere or a final political gesture, historians still debate. What is not debated is what happened next. The Kiin uprising failed, but it succeeded in the way Yui claimed he wanted. In the days after the executions, the senior counselors of the shogunate met in private to discuss what to do. The hardliners argued for a brutal solution: expel every Ronin from Edo, banish them from all the major cities. A different voice spoke against this. Abe Tadaki, another senior counselor, argued that mass expulsion would only create more enemies. The big cities were the only places where masterless warriors had any chance of finding legitimate work. Force them out, and you guarantee thousands more bandits in the rural roads. The council agreed with Abe. The next day, the shogunate quietly announced reforms. The rules around daimyo inheritance were loosened, making it easier for lords to pass their lands to heirs without confiscation. Under the previous three shoguns, the Tokugawa government had confiscated nearly 2,700,000 acres of daimyo land. Under the fourth shogun, Tokugawa Ieyatsuna, that figure dropped to 182,000 acres. The pipeline that had created new Ronin year after year began to dry up. By the second half of the 17th century, the masterless samurai were no longer a population crisis. The ones who remained either found work, faded into the merchant and artisan classes, or accepted lives of quiet poverty. But the Ronin had not disappeared, and in the year 1703, one final story would write them into legend forever. You probably know this one already. The story of the 47 Ronin. In 1701, a young daimyo named Asano Naganori was provoked into drawing his sword inside Edo Castle by a senior protocol official named Kira Yoshinaka. The shogun ordered Asano to commit seppuku that same day. His domain in Akko was confiscated. His 370 samurai retainers all became Ronin. 47 of them, led by Asano's chief counselor Oishi Kuranosuke, refused to let the matter end there. They knew Kira was protected, watched, surrounded by spies, so they waited. Oishi spent 2 years in the leisure quarters of Kyoto, drinking, sleeping with prostitutes, behaving like a man who had given up. He pretended to be a broken drunkard so completely that Kira's spies eventually reported back that the threat had passed. It was an acete. On the snowy night of January 30th, 1703, the 47 gathered in Edo, attacked Kira's mansion, broke through his fortifications, found the old man hiding in a charcoal storage shed behind a secret door, and beheaded him. They carried the head across the city to the grave of their dead master and laid it as an offering. Then they turned themselves in. The shogun ordered them to commit seppuku, which they did. They were buried beside their master at Sengakuji Temple in Tokyo, where their graves can still be visited today. The story became the greatest legend of Japanese samurai loyalty. But here is what does not appear in the legend. In the year that the 47 Ronin took their revenge, there were still tens of thousands of other Ronin scattered across Japan, plotting, starving, drinking, making umbrellas, pawning their swords, forgotten. The 47 were the exception. The shogunate desperately wanted you to remember them because remembering them meant forgetting everyone else. It worked. 400 years later, the average person can name the 47 and nothing else about the masterless samurai class. The Ronin lingered into the final decades of the Edo period. When Japan was forced open by American warships in 1853, a new wave of Ronin emerged, samurai who abandoned their masters voluntarily to fight against the Tokugawa shogunate they blamed for Japan's humiliation. The most famous of them was Sakamoto Ryoma, a Ronin from Tosa province who helped engineer the alliance that would bring down the shogunate forever. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration ended Tokugawa rule. A few years later, the new imperial government abolished the samurai class entirely. The word Ronin technically died with them, but the word survived. In modern Japanese, Ronin is still used today. It refers to a high school graduate who failed his university entrance exams and is studying to retake them. It refers to a salaryman between jobs. It refers in a quiet way to anyone adrift between two stations in life. A wave man. 400 years after the Battle of Sekigahara, the ghost of the masterless samurai still walks the Japanese language. The Ronin were not the heroes of the legends. They were not the villains of the propaganda. They were the men the system created and then refused to forgive. They wore two swords through poverty so deep their wives sold their bodies. They wrote books that businessmen still read. They almost burned down the Capitol. They turned themselves into ghosts so the rest of the country could pretend the cost of order had been lower than it was. If you found this story interesting, subscribe for more deep dives into the parts of Japanese history that the textbooks skip. I'll see you in the next one.